Everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here with Larry and Joe. It's riches of three, talking about an amazing comic. I think we're about to go through. How are you guys doing?
I'm all right, Perch and Larry. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, and I'm looking at this wonderful Wolverine Weapon X collection and having my hands on it and actually being able to talk about something that makes me feel good, that exhilarates me, that's something I can be passionate about in a mostly, it's like 95% positive way. So, doing good.
We'll zoom right in on the negative parts. That's what we do here. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm holding my trade that's like 20 years old. So we're all very old is where this is going. But I'm looking at the credits here for like the collected edition, and it's got, Bill Jemas was the president at the time. He's at another company. Ben Abernathy was the collections editor at the time. He's at another company. Let's see here. Joe Quesada. Hey, really stuck it out. And let's see, Bob Greenberg. This came out during the 1 year Bob Greenberger worked at Marvel. This collection, not the series, obviously, but yeah, he's mostly known for being a senior editor at DC, mostly in the 80s. But yeah, he worked at Marvel for 1 year.
Yeah, the one I have is the 2007 hardcover. It was collection editor Mark D. Beasley and assistant editor Michael Short, associate editor Jennifer Grunwald. I guess is it Mark Grunwald's daughter or wife or relative of some kind, I believe. But
I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. But hey, good for her.
David Gabriel still there.
Yeah. Hey, he's
stuck it out too.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Also, it's like 30 years since Weapon X came out, serialized in Marvel Comics Presents 72 through 84, which Marvel Comics Presents. Seriously, most of those comics aren't collected. I know the Colossus story with Anna Cinti and Rick Leonardi is collected, one of those 64-page collections. Same thing with the Wolverine Blood Hungry, Peter David, Sam Keith. But the other one that Peter David, Sam Keith did, Wolverine Venom, which was like a very rough Sam Keith art, which Sam Keith stuff's kind of scratchy, but he's like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to do the Max. Basically, it's a trial run for the Max.
Yeah, Marvel Presents has always been difficult to collect. They're always spliced up, and you'll see all these collections out that are just like, what was it? If you have Epic collections and they have stories with like Captain America or something in it, it'll be like, and includes material from Marvel Presents or Marvel Fanfare and books like that. DC's always had a difficult time with that too, in terms of their books were anthologies for longer. So many of the collections are like, this has the main stories from Detective, and this has, or just the Aquaman story in Adventure Comics, stuff like that. But yes, we can go on all day about
the one thing. Considering how good it is, the Don McGregor, Gene Colan, Black Panther comic that ran for like 25 chapters in Marvel Comics Presents, that is an amazing story that has not been collected. But it's one of those things like it just. I don't think it's been collected. I've not been able to find it or find any information on it, but maybe I didn't look in the right places. But yeah, there's a lot of that stuff that hasn't been collected. But thankfully, Wolverine Weapon X has, and wow, it's been a while since I've read this, and I was a little bit nervous after New X-Men.
Sure.
New X-Men had shaken me to my core. Trust nothing. Like, oh, it was great. I got people excited. Beast looked like an actual beast. This, that, and I'm like,
that was a downer. Yeah, for that you could look in the retrospectives. You could see that video in there. That was a video of disappointment. But this one is not.
No, it's not.
This is so like you're saying. This was in Marvel Comics Presents. This comes out in the late '80s in '88, and for whatever reason, I thought it was in fewer issues than this, but it actually was. It went across 13 issues of Marvel Comics Presents from issue 72 to issue 84.
Yep.
And what's striking here is for those of you who do not know Marvel Comics Presents, what we're talking about, it was an anthology series. It usually had, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, about 2 to 3 stories in each one, right? Was that about what they would do?
8 pages each, roughly. So yeah, about 3 to 4, yeah. Depending on some of the stories were 16 pages, like when they would do like a double size deal. But yeah, you 3 or 4. It's like 32 pages total usually.
It what's striking to me is if you think about this in the 80s, it's an anthology book, and it had we mentioned already Rick Leonardi. It had Rich Buckler, we just talked about, was in there. Dave Cockrum, John Buscema. You had Ron Lim do stories, and then the one we're talking about, Barry Windsor Smith. You had a ton of talent in this anthology book. It's not like what we think of today, where it seems like they put the people trying out for a spot at the company in those things. This one, they tried to keep fairly decent talent in the book. At least one of those stories would be by one of the bigger names.
Yeah.
You'd have like up and coming talent too, but yeah, Barry Windsor Smith cutting loose. Like this was actually, I think one of his first solo Marvel books, because I know he went off to do that, which would eventually, it's coming out, I believe, next month, Monsters, which has been 35 years in the making. They come out through Fantagraphics. It's a 360-page hardcover that is built off of the Hulk story that he wanted to do about Brian Banner and the trauma and the psychological and emotional trauma that Bruce faced at home that led to the creation of the Hulk, that monster of rage. And he had like some of the pages he wanted to basically do like a Marvel Max take, language and content, and like and Shooter was like, I don't know. And then as story goes, I may be mistaken. Joe could correct me on this. And Bill Mantlo came across the stuff, copied it, and basically regurgitated it as his own thing. And that's how he got the Bruce Banner got smacked around as a kid story, which is probably less impactful than what Barry Windsor Smith would have done.
Yeah, I think Glenn Greenberg touched on some of that, and how after Bill, the Hulk was never quite the same. And all that in a not great sort of way. But you have Barry Windsor Smith, who was already very well known in X circles for, let's see, I mean, he did basically all the stuff involving that life death storyline with Storm and Forge. And I know from having talked to Claremont before that he really wished he got to work more with Barry on X-Men because he really enjoyed working with him. Well, you didn't get to on this one, Chris.
Well, in Life Death 3 was, I guess, rejected, so it got turned into a Dasher in Africa, which got turned into Young Gods and Friends, part of the Storyteller, which Dark Horse put out and I guess didn't promote or do something because he only did 9 issues out of 12, which is a crying shame because we didn't get the completion of some amazing. Any less work from Barry Windsor Smith in the world is a detriment to. It's a loss because. And I'm a huge Barry Windsor Smith fan. I first came across his work. I always thought it was like weird, way too it's like, wow, this looks so weird, and it same thing with Kirby. And I grew to love both Kirby and Barry Windsor Smith. So it's this interesting solo take on the origin of Wolverine, of the beast, the animal. Is a man, he's the animal, he's mutant, he's neither. And it's a fantastic read.
It is.
It's
At this moment, taking kind of you back to '88, Wolverine, in terms of the comics, his origin was unknown. We had, you had a vague sense that he was part of the government program in Canada. You had this connection to Alpha Flight they would reference. You had his stuff he was doing in Japan, but they really weren't. They intentionally left Wolverine's origin fairly mysterious of kind of how he came to be. And so I remember when this was being promised, there was a pretty decent amount of hype around this was going to fill in some of those blanks of what his origin was. But it's important to note because since this time, we've gotten Wolverine's origin kind of retold and then told and changed up and then told again. And I mean, it's there's a moment, I know it's not continuity in Marvel, where Wolverine's like a caveman, and I mean, they've done a lot of nonsense to Wolverine.
But wait, I have a mission of that. I have a mission. I actually like the potential, like the campfire tale that Wolverine was a caveman because the short, angry, savage thing. Campfire tale. Never confirm that that's actually the thing. It's like, yeah, Wolverine was in middle ages as a knight getting stabbed. Okay, fine. That's whatever.
Never confirm, I think, is the key. But yeah.
Yes.
But wait, Perch, that doesn't make any sense because Marvel's never done a crisis event. So how could you have multiple backgrounds here? There can only be one.
I know it's confusing, but it turns out you can retcon a retcon. It's they've done it before. Mephisto was involved somehow, I think.
Memory implants, my friend. Memory implants.
And as brutal and graphic as this is, a lot of people, even if you haven't read Weapon X, a lot of what's in here is burned into your mind because this was the origin story they went with the 90s cartoon.
Yes.
The professor we see in this is the same character design and character they use in the flashback sequences in the cartoon where they're creating Wolverine.
It is, and I remember the kind of the oddness of I would imagine kids watching that cartoon are like, I should go pick up the comics, because at that point that was something you could do. You could actually go to a local comic shop. You could pick up comics. There was that kind of it was people watching the cartoons were heading to the shop.
Sure.
And I have to imagine that was a bit of a shock for parents.
Well, especially in that instance, it's like, oh, I want to read this story. Well, it's in a comic called Marvel Presents over 13 issues, and you know, you can go through the back issues, I guess. And
oh yeah, this wouldn't have been an easy entry for people, especially pre-collected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to even remember what else was going on at the time. Trying to quickly look at what else Marvel Comics Presents was doing alongside this. Oh, a Firestar story. Okay, there you have it. So
was that the 4-part Firestar story that Tom DeFalco was writing at the time?
It was the 6-part, and it was actually Marie Javins.
Okay, so this is the second, the third Firestar. Series. Oh boy, but oh geez.
Turner, yeah.
Something that's interesting to keep in mind too with Weapon X is, in a way, it's also not even really a Wolverine story because we're mostly seeing everything through the POV of the Professor, Cornelius, and Hines.
Right.
And the whole story really revolves around them and how they're reacting to this thing that is Wolverine.
Yeah, I mean it's Wolverine. I mean the first issue of this. So to kind of set it up, I mean we get almost like a prologue. In fact, they maybe even build it that way a little bit, where Wolverine's drinking and like as he does, and he's basically he's kind of getting some memories back that look pretty horrific. You see blood, you see lots of wires, you see the things that Barry Windsor Smith is excellent at drawing. Lots of tubes and close-ups on needles and blood and things. But from that moment on, Wolverine almost shifts to being kind of a force of nature, and seen through the eyes of some of these other people who experimented on him. I noticed there's heavy captions here, which definitely makes it a terrible story. It's amazing to me, like very incredibly detailed panels. We introduce these characters. These characters hadn't appeared before, had they?
I don't think so. It's like you're getting, Joe's probably the expert on this. Like go deep dive in this stuff. It's like
I don't believe so. I believe this was all this was a brand new kind of origin for the characters. In the cartoon, they set it up where the professor was Lady Deathstrike's dad, but I don't think the case here. It's no. So
we're introduced to these new characters. We get them from the second part or the second issue on. It's just lots and lots of panels of kind of the experimentation and kind of this deep dive into what happened with Wolverine and kind of and all these pieces. But it's very much I don't know, how would you describe this? Is this a psychological story? Would that be?
I'd say horror. This is a This is like a Cronenberg body horror, in very much a sense of like the Fly, Videodrome. I'm getting that sense, and like even before all of it, and also because it takes place in Canada, and like pretty much all Cronenberg's films take place in Canada. But the lead up to it, like, what gets me is where you're seeing like, oh, Cornelius, oh, he was mercy killing people, and Hines is like a naive person from NASA trying to like one up and go up in the world, and like the professor is like, she's just basically a glorified typist. She's yes, she's smart, but like she ain't nothing. Like but we need somebody that's like a I guess you could call it like assistant. But where Wolverine, like the little files, you see he's like, well, Logan, and he's like, he shot a range officer because he's drunk, and he's borrowed money, and he's this nasty piece of work. He's drinking all the time. He's like, I'm gonna get on a I think he's gonna take a train, take a bus up to the Yukon, just get away from it all. Just get up, basically just go out in the middle of the woods, which I think a lot of people have just could relate to, just getting away from it all. But I got to settle some scores, and that's unfortunately because he didn't get on that bus and get out of town. That's when the Weapon X guys found him, and they trank him, and he's not going down. It's like, don't hurt the body, and like we got to put a beating on him, and they put a beating on him. And then, which is like when that body horror starts, when they've shaved him and they throw him into the tank with all the adamantium plugs for the infusion process, and it's like, oh my God, like what did you shave him with, sheep shears? I mean, no, he was clean. He was shaved clean 20 minutes ago. It's like something like, what's going on here? You ain't telling me like you don't need to know just to start the process. And they got them all doped up on like beta blockers and antipsychotics and this and that, and like seizure medications, and keeping the psyche suppressed. And he's like writhing around in pain, and like you feel it. It's terror. And it's like once they put him in that bath, once they have abducted him, that's when basically they've caused a oncoming storm. It's like, oh, it's a little tropical wave in the Atlantic. Oh, no big deal. And then it turns in like a category 5 that's moving your way. And there's nothing you could do to stop. You could shoot it. You could nuke it. It ain't going to do nothing. Just keep on coming. And that's how it feels. And that terror and the build up to it, like there's panels where you're seeing this nightmare vision with the spiny bones and this depressing life that Logan has before this experiment, and what these people are like, they're almost optimistic of this experiment, and then how that just devolves into terror as well. And like I said, this is a sci-fi horror. This is like, you should be in the same vein as like a Cronenberg or a Ridley Scott's Alien almost.
I mean, it very much you're and I think the credit goes to Barry Windsor Smith here for kind of the mood and the lighting and the color and everything that they're putting in here. They really sell this idea that very bad things are happening to him. I'm trying to see, did Smith do his own coloring?
I believe he did.
Smith did everything, and he did some of the lettering even.
Yeah.
He put all the placement, not to take credit away from Jim Novak, who was the letterer on this, but the way Barry went about this is he did all the lettering and caption placement to make the story flow. And you'll see that because there's a lot of, if you're not as well versed in some more complicated comics, you might get lost reading this because you end up reading a lot of things in like a horseshoe, where it'll start at the top left and horseshoe down and then end at the bottom or the top right. So there are some interesting choices with lettering that if you're not too keen on, you might get lost. So just be aware of that as you're reading something like this.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I love this approach, and I would suspect people who are, other than it's going to go left to right, if you've read a lot of manga, this style is going to be a little bit more familiar to you, because they do use this technique a lot of framing the art with the captions, which is what Smith is doing here as well. But it's very powerful, and he very kind of purposefully puts captions when it's disjointed, it jars the image a little bit. It makes the whole experience you feel through the color, the drawing, every piece adds to this idea that this guy is being experimented on and tortured, and it's terrible. And there's been a plenty of comics over the years of, the evil scientist captures the hero or some hapless person experiments on them. But it always feels like it's a little bit more of like a day spa type torture. Whereas Wolverine's here, kind of like you were saying, Larry, this looks like ugly, bloody, just nightmarish. This is not a situation you want to be in. And it is, just as an aside, as I'm kind of checking out some of the Marvel Comics Presents issues, it is, we go from this story to a Shauna the She-Devil story to a Constrictor story, and then Human Torch and the Iceman, who, where the Torch and the Iceman have to save the Torch's wife, and Iceman's hitting on her. So it's tonally a lot of things going on.
This definitely reads way better as just a graphic novel. It's almost like they should have just done that in the first place.
Yeah, you might say, hey, it was good for sales for this run, but
sure. I think there were, part of the problem when you do something like a Marvel Presents, when you do these sort of anthology books, it does become difficult when you start talking about things like royalties on a floppy, because should they be evenly divided if everyone's buying it for like the one story?
Yes.
There are issues of that are worth discussing. But one of the other interesting things here too, beyond just the lettering and everything else he sets up here, there are a lot of other intentional art direction decisions. The panel breaks, the white spaces between panels, are supposed to be showing some sort of passage of time. Barry Windsor Smith makes some very specific choices throughout the book where he omits panel breaks, where you're supposed to be reading it and observing it as happening rapidly. There's a scene where Wolverine is extending out his claws and there are no panel breaks. It's supposed to be showing this as a very rapid thing that's happening compared to other moments. It's that level of detail and thought going into the book that I think helps to elevate this story.
Oh, I think so too. I love just like anyone that's been through some, very traumatic stuff, very violent stuff, a lot of the times, like, you'll flash back to those sequences and where you're going from, oh, he's out of it, and then he's flashing back into the tank. And then the gasping for air as the air comes out of the respirator that they got him hooked up to, and then flashing back to the tubes of the adamantium feeding into his body, and as blood squirting from the back of his palm and the back of his hand as the claws are about to pop, and this terror, this anger, this fear that he has, and then he slaughters a guy, and it's this kind of jarring imagery, which I understand. Like, I've known people that have read this. Oh, it's so confusing. I'm like, they just want Wolverine go in, hey, smoke a cigar, hey, bub, cut somebody, his gun in half, and whatever. This is the birth of a monster. This is something I think I honestly don't like. If it wasn't for Barry Windsor Smith, I guess, pedigree and him, being around for, at that point, was 20 years because of Conan. And then his little spot work on, I think it was like 2 issues of X-Men before it became Uncanny. And then he did, I think it was 1 or 2 issues. Stranko did 2, he did 1. And then, his work on Conan and, all that. I don't think they would have let anybody else kind of get away with what he got away with in this book, because it's so, they're like, oh, we'll put you with a writer or something. Like, no, it's like, no, I'm going off and doing my own thing. And because it's a singular vision, and this jarring imagery, and like you said, with the absence of panel breaks showing the immediate rapid action to the close-up on the claw is the camera, the view is rotating slightly. So you've seen the claws come out with the blood and viscera, and then the professor is like, just to be safe, let's keep the door shut just to be safe. This kind of like this sinister, but also kind of a little concerned, because even he's like, I don't really know what could happen. We didn't expect this part. And it's this, and then like Wolverine's just, or Logan, and at this point, the project, the Experiment X, and, hanging over this, the guy's body. He's got his ribs sticking out of his body, and this like poor technician was locked in the lab with this monster, and he's not like enjoying that he's killed this guy. He's just, it's like an animal. It's like he's not like an animal, doesn't really play with its food. It just eats it or whatever, and he's just standing over covered in blood. And the professor's like, yeah, interesting. Yeah, magnificent. I like this. It's great. It's terrible. But it's great. It's like terrible,
No, it leads to this next, I think the next issue or the next chapter, which is a really good conversation between the doctor and Cornelius here of, basically letting him in on the fact that, the professor here knows that Logan's a mutant. And so it's an intentional thing that he's done to try and experiment on a mutant. But you get some really nice, I don't know. This is one of my favorite narratives in the book where he's talking about how, he was an animal all along. And it's the description of Wolverine, the description of kind of this infernal thing is what Logan has always been, a violent individual pummeling his way through a purposeful life. We are giving him a purpose. We are giving him, there's a madness in this experiment of we're making a better human, which is, I think takes this whole experiment up to another level.
Oh yeah, and eventually when they're talking, basically it's like because Cornelius is brought in to basically program this monster to turn into a killing machine that you can control, and it's like but your earlier description was more apt, perhaps a mindless murdering animal. I believe you said, guess so. It's like, this is why I'm depending on you, good doctor. Logan must be resurrected now, restructured now, trained, then programmed. You can do all of this manipulation of the mindless, Dr. Cornelius. It is your calling. And it's like this. He's like, yeah, I can reprogram this guy. Yeah, he was a killing machine all before. He was doing it at bare basic. We're going to amp that up. We're going to provide him with this indestructible skeleton to a body that already can regenerate, and now he's got claws. You drop him in buck naked, and he can just take out anybody and anything at that point. And it's like, yeah, I could do that. And like this idea of, it's like follow, not necessarily following orders, but and also like hey, I'll just see what I can do. We should do it, and maybe I could do that. Like it's a dangerous path to go down, as we see, and it's not going to bite him in the rear at all. It's a happy ending, folks.
No, sure. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say something else that's worth mentioning here, which I'm taking a bit from Larry Hama's epilogue that he wrote for the original trade. That's important to keep in mind in this story. There are no tights, no recognizable uniforms. Wolverine never says he's the best at what he does. There is no instance of a snicked sound effect through the entirety of the comic. He doesn't refer to himself as the old Canuck head or, Canuckle head, anything like that. There are no hidden meanings, no coy tricks, no comic industry in jokes, no writing your name in the background. Yeah. There's, no like spray painting other people's names involved in the project, like on the wall in the background, anything like that. No pop culture references at all. There's nothing like that in this entire story. It's not trying to be cool. It's not trying to be referential. And after some of the comics I've read recently, it is such a breath of fresh air to read something that is so incredible that at no point is trying to be cool or make any reference to other cool things.
No, absolutely. I think I've talked about this before. I don't know with either of you before, but this idea of the evergreen comic, a comic that you can pick up 30 years later and it's still going to be relevant, and it's not going to feel dated intentionally through pop culture references or some silly thing that may be popular. At no point does the Doctor talk about Where's the Beef or any other nonsense from the late 80s. It's a comic that where the style and the coloring, and depending on how you're looking at it, so this thing has been recolored terribly in some trades. It's been done well, and it's been done very poorly. I've got a trade somewhere around here where it just looks awful with what they did, the nightmare of what they did to poor Smith's art. But this book holds up. You could read it today. It will not feel like you're reading a book that's 30 years old. It will feel like a new story that just does what it's supposed to do, keeps the focus on, and is respecting what it's trying to accomplish.
But if you don't have a story where you show panels of people texting on an app, people are going to think that this is, what grandma and grandpa used to read while kicking cans down the street.
You need a thing. You need a little captions, like with a little arrow pointing down. It's like, Dr. Cornelius doesn't like people to suffer. He's good with gas. Dr. Hines is looking to go to Mars. Wolverine, Logan, Experiment X. His best is what he does, and it ain't very nice. Like that kind of thing where they do that. It's like, it's the only thing I can think of, and I did think of this, and it isn't overt because I don't really think it looks exactly like him. But Cornelius kind of reminded me of John Byrne. I thought
that too at the time. Yeah. I remember thinking that, what were they riffing on Byrne? Because he does have a Byrne look to it. I don't know. You could fix these problems though, Joe. We could just have the Doctor talking about need to Instagram it or something, and it will be.
Well, you have Hines go like, it's going to be a long night, so how about we Uber Eats something to the office, and then Cornelius can be like, "Didn't you hear Uber's canceled?" And then they can be like, "Wait a minute, I got to go search the Uber hashtags on Twitter to see why they've been canceled." Like, they could do that.
Or maybe it's like in the panel where Wolverine's on the table, about to be hooked up to the machine to see inside his mind, and like Cornelius is like, "Hines, you can't be taking photos of Experiment X, of violate HIPAA, and also it's top secret." And Cornelius is just giving her, and she's like, "No, don't mansplain me." And we're modern. It's like, no, it's this.
It's a shame.
It is. There wasn't another page after that where Cornelius is watching an adaptation of Frankenstein on TV to be like, "This is odd and very similar to the situation that we're in right now." Nothing like that. I'm gonna go put these moon shoes on and hop over to grab a Crystal Pepsi.
For the benefit of people watching, we are being sarcastic.
There's only one bit of humor, I think, in the book. Well, I think the only one that really stood out to me was the one where it's Cornelius has got it hooked up to take like some basically suggestions. It's like you have one master, and that's me, and you'll do anything I say, Professor. Yes, what? We haven't begun, sir. The machine isn't on, and please get on with it, Doctor. It's like this. I love it. It's just like one little bit, but it also goes to show how much of an ass this guy is. Even though that's the kind of people they put in power, though. That's like
sure.
The professor's an ass, but he's not as much of an ass as we think. Later, he's still an ass, though. Yep. But we do find out later, it's like he's actually he's still horrible, but he's not quite as horrible as we thought.
It's like these villains have depth and complexity.
No one wants to read that.
No, it's terrible. No, this scene you mentioned, I'm staring at it right now. It's a funny scene of kind of this comedy, and even Smith is such a master at what he does that you see a slight grin on the face of the Doctor. Just the expressions that come through on this are hilarious. It's really well done. I think this chapter in general is powerful because they're seeing kind of what Logan is imagining on the screen, and they're getting this sense that he's tortured and just all these different pieces, and then finally at the chapter ends with on the screen he's picturing Cornelius just brutally murdered by his own hand, and it's how it takes that humor at the beginning and really really ratchets it up. So.
Yeah, this like where they're like, "Oh, don't worry, Hines. It's just the impulse," and like you slowly see the blade, the claws coming out, and then he's like laying there on the table with his arm slightly cocked up in the air with the claws out, and on the screen is like is the professor's face, like just like the death mat covered in blood and with 3 hole punctures, and it's this, and like Hines horrified, is like. This isn't good. Oh, don't worry about it. It's just what he wants to do. Like just turn off the monitors, turn it off, and it's great. It's that building of, and the tension. And this book, I don't suffer from any anxiety issues, and I know people that do, but this book can make you quite anxious, even though it's so like I said, 30 years old. I know how it ends, I know how it goes, but it's like that the anxiety levels that kick up because it's a lot of horror movies, they do the jump scares, but this is that slow build of tension and like it could build anxiety if you're reading it like this. Like we're trapped we're with the monster we've made. We've really screwed up. and
it's important to be able to do this sort of thing because you're walking into this story, and I don't think anyone at all thought for a second like, I don't know how Wolverine gets out of this prequel. We're all aware Wolverine's going to be fine, but not fine. But so to make a story like this and to have it be this tense and this gripping when we all more or less know how it eventually ends is a feat.
It's extremely hard to come by to do that. It's like for anybody, writer, artist, whoever, to be able to engage you that much, knowing, he'll be wearing the orange and brown or the red and blue, or the yellow and blue, red and blue. But no, he did wear the red and blue. That was when he did the stealth costume. When he was the early issues of the Wolverine series, we had the red and blue with that kind of like that stealth look, ninja look to it, where he had like little black gloves or dark blue gloves. But this is it's incredible. Like especially that where it's simply standing in the snow covered in sheep's blood.
Yeah.
Waiting for the ravenous wolves that haven't eaten for a week. And wow, it's
a crazy scene. I mean, and to your point you made earlier, this book, I have to believe Smith is doing this intentionally. I mean, with the captions, with what he's done, remember kind of what Joe was saying about this U shape of how you read it. He's making you feel very claustrophobic, and I think this is intentional. Where the panels are getting squeezed, the art is getting, everything is crushing the character, and I think it fits what's going on because you notice when the wolves attack Wolverine, suddenly the captions move out. They're spaced in different parts on the page. We move out of that kind of very claustrophobic feel, but then as he's brought more under control, they circle him back in again, and that combined with very, very expressive, distinctive art and color, and he's got tubes and blood everywhere. I mean, you feel very claustrophobic, you feel very anxious reading this. It is definitely a comic where you feel the mood in addition to just reading the mood, and that's pretty rare. We rarely get stuff like that.
And the overlapping lettering, in where two people are talking and they start overlapping each other, like a stage play would, or films. I often don't do that, but when they do it, it makes it feel more real. And then sometimes the captions are actually partly cut off, like you're only hearing part of that, text the words coming in. Because when I read, I hear, I don't like, sound effects it's called onomatopoeia. It's like, that's not sound effects. There's no sound in comics. And no, to me, it is like there is like this, the rage howl that Wolverine gives. And then, they basically cut him off and let him sleep outside, but it's negative 15 degrees. Yeah. It'll toughen him up, let him sleep in the gore that he has created. And it's this, it's very Hulk-like in that. It reminded me of like the Hulk, where like Hulk would, rest wherever, and this, and then they just wake him back up, put the little collar around his neck like Taylor from Planet of the Apes, and then take him back to the to his cage, basically. And they hook him up with the eventually hook him up with the shoots for his claws to come out. It's like, we will help him out a little bit in that regard, but Yeah, it's just it's wonderfully. It's so like you said, the lettering being partially done layout wise and by Barry Windsor Smith, and for it to encapsulate like the panel, the page is the splash where he's sitting with the helmet on the floor, the wires all hooked up, the battery packs, and the lettering starts, and it starts like an upside down. It's basically a reverse C, and it's like from the left to the top to the right hand side all the way down to the bottom and to the left again, and that pattern is like you said, encircling, swirling around him, never escaping, keeping him. It's a spiral. It's like vertigo or something, and this it so well crafted in the backgrounds, the coloring of the computers and these machines, and it's like so 70s, but this because a lot of the stuff from the 70s, like the haircuts, the computers and stuff, it says computer without saying computer. It's like, oh, that's a Dell, and that's an iPad, and this, that, whatever. No, it's like that's technology. It just says technology. It's very generic without being boring, and it's very visually stimulating, and especially when you have this slumped resting monster at rest with the red and the purple and the green and the orange and blues and the purples and all that stuff around him, and it just makes him so much more visceral. It's wonderfully crafted in that regard.
Who at the time when they're making this, I'm just trying to think back. Marvel had a lot of different things. I mean, tonally, you had John Byrne, I think, doing She-Hulk around the same time, which was more of a fourth wall breaking comedy book. I'm trying to remember if Marvel was really doing anything at this level. You had some stuff coming out from Epic that probably was in the same zone, but in terms of the kind of even the Marvel Comics Presents, this all was a very big shift from what had been going on.
Yeah, this whole thing, like just reading it and digesting this story, it feels almost like if Frank Miller did Alan Moore's Swamp Thing anatomy lesson as a Wolverine story. Like,
yeah, I can see that.
It's got all these elements to, because it has a lot of Frank Miller-y kind of Dark Knight kind of vibes in here, where it's it's very gritty and brutal, and some of the framing in here. But you also have and I'm not saying this as a way to diminish Barry Windsor Smith, because obviously all of his traits are in here, and a lot of the stuff he did on X-Men, and that like one issue of Iron Man that was like the epilogue to Armor Wars, which is also incredible.
My first Barry Windsor Smith comic. That's the first. Hey, you got to start with a first Barry Windsor Smith comic. Start with that one. That blew my mind. It actually kind of scared me as a kid. That issue, because it's that it's that weird, and it's. But yeah, you're right. Like the Frank Miller, almost like a Frank Miller channel, the anatomy lesson, and it's that sequence is going from page to page, because with the collection, the hardcover I have, it's like page 62 and 63. It's where the professor pours his hot coffee on the knocked out.
Yeah, that's a crazy scene.
And then it cuts to Wolverine with the battery pack and helmet, the Videodrome helmet, because that's basically the helmet from Videodrome, running, and that pose where he's got the claw. I think it's been reused a lot, where he's part of his arm's cut off and everything, but in the panel it's like that more than half of the page vertical. That is, to me, reminds me very much of Frank Miller, and and there's something so cinematic about this comic that isn't. We're just going to do as much as I love New Frontier by Darwin Cook, it is 3 panels, splash, 3 panels, 3 panels, 3 panels, 3 panels. It's basically that the entire each 64-page book. And then, there's 6 books. So most of it's like 3 panels. And yes, it's very cinematic, very widescreen. But this is like, it, to me, hooks me in much more. And it's so much better told visually. I don't think and it's dense, but it's 8-page chapters. That's the thing. It's like the other Marvel Comics Presents stories, there's some good ones, but I don't think any of them could compare to this. But the density.
This was the best of the run. I mean, John Byrne had some stuff. Steve Ditko has some stuff. There's definitely some strong, cool stories in there. But in terms of 13 issues, I mean, the Chris Claremont Buscema story, I think that kicked it all off with Wolverine, is a good story. It's fun and great to read. But this is next level it's really striking. Again, remembering that Smith is doing everything here.
Yeah,
he is telling. So I think simultaneously, I don't know if people really digest how hard a job. So Smith is basically coming in to tell a piece of Wolverine's origin, a character where that had been hidden forever, and he's not Chris Claremont, and Claremont is of course doing his own thing, and it's like the pressure to tell this story, which had been on the shelf for so long. And they do this without a relaunch of Marvel Comics Presents. You might be, shocked to hear it, but this started in like issue 72. So there's no brand new number one, no 50 variant covers or anything. And Smith just winds up cranking out a story that is incredibly powerful, but also true to Wolverine. There's nothing in here that's a giant retcon, nothing in here that changes everything you always knew about Wolverine. It reinforces what you knew about Wolverine. There's no shock in the sense of he's not who we thought he was. We always had the sense Wolverine was tortured, that he was experimented on. There'd kind of been these vague hints to it. I guess the shock is how brutal it was and how unflinching they show us all those scenes.
Yeah, the dehumanizing nature of it. And that's one of the things reading this again and knowing, more than when I first read this, late 90s, early 2000s, and then it was a bit to wrap my head around then. I got it now, but this is probably like the 5th or 6th time I've read the story, because it's one of those things, it sits with you. It's like a very hearty meal. And in the brutality, what is done to him, the brutality that he does to everybody else, like the sequence where Weapon X has escaped, and he's in that and I'm pretty sure that's been homaged in God knows how many things.
Oh yeah,
where the two soldiers are shooting at him. One soldier has his arm cut off at the bicep. He's got the 3 puncture wounds. There's just broken glass, viscera on the ground. Wolverine just coming at these two soldiers, and they have no chance in hell. And it's just the violent content in this. And it's like, I was trying to think like what else that not epic was this violent. And at this time, and I can't think of anything that was close. It's like maybe the Marvel, the graphic novels, I think, there's some brutality in God Loves Man Kills and a couple other things, but that's, graphic novel, and then they had the magazines. But as far as a Marvel comic, if it won't continuity, it definitely has been continuity since. It's like, this is just too good not to. We got to revisit Weapon X. We got to do everything we can to milk this thing dry. And just even when it's just the panel where it's before we get to the slaughter, the epic slaughter, where it's like these 3 soldiers and seeing the claws coming through his back, and it's knowing that there will be a generation of people like this stuff will never, unfortunately, with the Disney buy, like you'd never see this Wolverine. You'd never see this. Like that's one thing about the X-Men movies, which a lot of people like. They borrowed so much of this, for that, and the cartoons, of course, the video games, but the brutality of what was done to him and what he could do to others. It's like, why even have Wolverine in PG-13 movies when he's going to be able to cut robots? Like, you can't show him stabbing people and bleeding out, like taking somebody's arm off. Even in the animation, like, coming soon to Disney Plus, Weapon X, slaughtering. It's never going to happen. It's like this.
Yeah, I don't see this as a Disney Plus series, which with a Miss Marvel, in credit scene, probably not going to happen. The characters of Cornelius and Hines through this whole thing they're presented to us like the the kind of the helpless observers who are watching this nightmare go down, and kind of this creeping professor. But there's more depth. I mean, what do you think of those two characters? How do they help this whole story frame out?
These characters are so good. I love that like the balance between Cornelius being this character who is directly in the middle of the cold, brutal professor and the very human Hines.
Mm-hmm.
And how the three of them are juggling things and trying to figure this out, what they're going to do, all under, the purview of the professor, although they hint throughout the story that the professor has orders from a higher organization or person, that they hint at. There's some exchanges that make you believe that Cornelius is on to the professor, that is not being completely honest about that, and he's kind of like feeding into it, like, oh, of course, there's, you're in charge, like that kind of stuff going on. So it's really a story about them and how they handle Logan here. They're just so good. It's very reminiscent to me of like an Alien film, like the first Alien, with Ridley Scott, and dealing with the crew. Even though the movie's Alien, it's not about the alien. It's about this crew and how they interact and live around this alien that's trying to kill them. It's very similar. And just watching them interact, watching Cornelius get under the professor's skin, watching Cornelius and the professor in particular keep pushing each other's buttons and like feeling each other out, and like, how far can I push this before something really bad happens? And you watch that relationship of theirs play out as Hines is more leaning towards Cornelius, but also cares about her own life and is also willing to do whatever the professor says as well. It's just such an interesting dynamic with these characters, and that Hines ends up being the only one that we witness, possibly, that Logan wouldn't just like straight up murder.
And he's Wolverine, the ultimate simp. No, but no, it's this. Because he senses, it's like an animal. Like if you have that "don't mess with me" attitude, a lot of animals won't mess with you. And it's like, if you have this kind of like timid, fearful, and animals like, oh, easy prey. And the level of detail, it's like a lot of I don't know who else would think, oh, his flesh is melting off like a wax on a candle. He's stepping up these rungs, and bits of his flesh is still on fire, attached to the rungs. It's like the melted flesh is wrapping around the rungs. The gore in this, it's just on a whole other level. I don't think, and half of his the flesh over his eyes melted, so he's only got one eye you can see out of.
It's hard to watch, but that's kind of the intent. I mean, they're trying to make a story that's very tough to look at, and not because it sucks, but because it's good. A lot of other people have mastered that first part, but we get this very kind of horrific thing scene. He gets, the professor loses his hand, and then he loses his other hand, and Wolverine kind of chews his way through everything. In our final issue, though, they kind of put that back in the box a bit.
But they set it all up, though. That's the thing. That's the complaint I've heard after I've recommended this to some people, and by some people, I mean like three of the people I've recommended this to have come back to me, and this is years ago now. I haven't had too many people complain about it since. More like, there's any more Barry Windsor Smith stuff out there? It's like, oh yeah, go read this. And it's like, yeah, I can't. It's out of print. I'm like, that's a problem. But the setup that, wait, so did this happen? What happened? What's reality? And it's, it's just, and they joke earlier on. It's like, what's the most dangerous game? And it's like a Bengal tiger, a white Bengal tiger, and it's like, no, man, it's man. And then you see a white Bengal tiger, and it's this. It's kind of it's strange. It's like
the book sets it up. It earns its moments. It is. I've heard the complaint of like, oh well, but some of this didn't happen, so it was just a dream. But it's not just a dream. It's programming. They're trying to create these moments that really kind of then fit the character, and so but it turns on them. Kind of our series concludes. This comic concludes with Wolverine is basically had the moment of escape. The Wrangler's supposed to come take him in. They have their compliment of success. We're learning now more about these characters, the Professor and Cornelius and Hines, which has changed our viewpoint of all of them and who they are. But Wolverine then comes back, and you just kind of leave it here uncertain whether they're going to live or die, because this experiment has grown out of control. We knew this experiment was going to go out of control at some point. I mean, the entire series is about the fact that they've got him just barely on a tether, and here we are, and you know, so we're left to kind of imagine at the end, are Hines, Cornelius, and the Professor here, are they in mortal danger? I mean, it seems like, you know, their experiment has turned on them, and we get to leave it there, and it's a good place to end it, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so, because and also before we find out about their, you know, like Wolverine comes through the door, the Professor's like, and they're like, somebody on the outside's, you know, blocking our, you know, basically kill commands for him. Like somebody on the outside. Now maybe that's a part of the programming too, but you know, the interlude escape as well. It's like this where he's out in the wilderness, and you know, the snowy waste, and it ends honestly as it should be. It shouldn't be like, it shouldn't end with him like standing there and then doing like a 3-panel sequence, which I could easily see happen, where it's like on the left it's 3 panels, or 4, but on the left it's like naked Wolverine from, like, you see part of it, like one of his eyes or whatever, part of his head, the hair and the tubes and the wires and everything, and part of his hairy leg, and then, you know, the claws out. The center is in like the Alpha Flight, the red and blue, and then the Wolverine, like, you know, whatever, maybe he's wearing a jacket or something. Basically, it's like, and this is how I eventually ended up joining the Alpha Flight, then the X-Men, Department H. And like, no, we don't need to see that. We just need to it's very European. It's a very, you know, leave it up to your imagination, and that, to me, a lot of people, that's scary.
I know. I mean, I think there were more. The comics used to do this more, right? I mean, Joe, in the 80s, there would be more. Comics didn't have to spell it all out for you like you're an idiot. They would let you go ahead and imagine some of this stuff at the end, and that was okay. Like, we didn't have to. You didn't. I don't know. It's probably one of the reasons I like the 80s and some of these other eras, is that you didn't need to. They need to spoon feed you the ending, to either put it all back in the box or just, you know, tell you. You don't need to imagine what happens next. Here's what happens next. This comic ends as it should.
The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. Does evil really? Does the devil really come out of the church at the end? What was going on? Was Giles really the Thing? Who knows? It's like, the book or the novel or this thing was like, it has nothing to say. Like, whatever. It doesn't need to be spelled out. And like I said, it's like this. It's a brutal journey. Yeah, exactly. It's a brutal journey that ends, and it honestly ends like how Wolverine is. Like, even though he was around people, he was isolated. At the book, he's isolated, and eventually, no matter if he joins the X-Men, Alpha Flight, what happens, truly at the end of the day, he should always be isolated. And like, it's one of those things about any type of, you know, character like this. You can't really have true growth. It's like, I stopped my drinking and I stopped my killing. I'm a man of peace, and that's boring. But also, it's like, it'll go against this character. It's like, he's been like this, and he should always stay like this to a degree. And it's a very important comic, and it's not just for the character, but for also storytelling. And honestly, like, if this was it works great for Wolverine. I was thinking, like, would this story work if it was, insert any other kind of character into, like, another, like, a creator owned, not some kind of guy. It's like, he ain't human. Like, maybe he's a fallen angel or something. I don't know. Whatever. It's or demon. He's a demon.
No, character. I mean, this kind of final few pages of him walking out into the snow. We get the captions again. Terrible storytelling technique, captions. But Hines and Cornelius are having this kind of back and forth that really reinforces: is he man? Is he monster? I feel bad about what we did to him. He's walking out. He's bloody and naked and icing up because the storm is terrible. And our final panel is this kind of bloody hand. What was your impression of what happened to the three? Did Wolverine kill them there at the end, or what do you think happened? Because obviously writers would come later to tell us what happened. But how do you think this story ended?
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, the way it came off to me was that they were probably dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that like, just that conversation they're having at the end there is more of a, that's what they were talking about previously before they had been killed. Yeah.
Because it makes sense that she's feeling, I mean, it kind of ties it up as a tragic bit of a story because she's feeling empathy for this man who they're turning into a monster. Mm-hmm. And then we get the flash to the bloody hand there, which indicates that they did succeed in turning him into a monster.
Yeah.
And it cost them their lives. I thought that was a very kind of poetic, nice, tied up ending. And it added to Wolverine's legacy. It revealed a little bit of his past of just kind of reinforcing how he was tortured. It introduced these characters that didn't need to come back 18 times. And it's one of those stories that just does its job. It completes its story. It's solid.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. It's one of those stories that should be the kind of evergreen story that, The Dark Knight Returns is. It should be on that level for people.
And Marvel, of course, has reprinted this many times. There's lots of trades. It actually is one of the easier books to get. I feel semi-confident I can go to Amazon and find it there now, although I'm worried a little bit just saying that out loud, if that's true. I remember at the time they were selling, I mean, this story, it was part of what they were doing at the time. You mentioned it was in the comic book. I remember they sold a toy of Wolverine at the time, naked with a helmet on, which was some crazy stuff to go buy in your local store.
They had the adamantium infusing machine where you could actually infuse it's like
you could be the professor.
Yeah. you could kidnap and torture a man and turn him into a monster. It's like, but the end of the book, I looked at it like, because they set it up that Hines and Cornelius, like, the only reason he killed you is because the professor hit you and you shot him. And he basically, it's like, you pissed him off. And I think if, like, I could see in my mind, I saw when Wolverine cuts through the wall, like, the kill switch ain't going to engage. He's on his own. I could see Hines and Cornelius off in one corner, and it's like, we'll stay out of your way. We're like Professor's like, don't leave me here. Don't. He's like slaughtering. But either way, like, they're traumatized. And also, if Wolverine don't come after him, the government will, or the those who are behind the experiment will, to either keep them silent, or you don't talk about this. This never happened, or in the fact that they tortured a man and got a lot of people killed. And it's like, either way, they're not coming out of this, empty-handed, unscathed. I mean, but
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And the downside about this collection I have, this one actually has. It came in 2007. This is after Origin, and it has the segment from Wolverine 166, which is I didn't read that. Like, I reread that part for this too. It's from a soldier's point of view, one of the soldiers that was at the facility when Wolverine broke loose, and this is a part of the story that apparently directly ties in. It's a prequel before the prelude to the Origin miniseries. And it's like Wolverine goes back to Weapon X and gets his memories. That's why, while in the new X-Men run, it's like, oh, James Howlett and everything like that, because it happened in this. And like that to me, that's terrible.
Yeah, that's no good.
Yeah, it's Wolverine wearing a little nightgown with the bone claws. Like,
why did that? So I'm trying to remember now. I mean, it was revealed, of course, that Cornelius survived, and he got to show up a few times. I'm pretty sure the Professor also survived. We got to see him a few times in the future. Did Hines show up as well?
I want to say yes, but I can't remember. It's like a lot of that stuff. It was not well written, so it was like not worth remembering.
None of it really matters. Nothing they've done to touch on this in the future was anything close to as good as this, and makes you wonder why they did it.
Yeah, I mean, Origin obviously sold really, really well at the time, but it didn't add anything of value to this story that was good on the surface. And
Wolverine likes redheads. Wolverine, he likes redheads. That's the only thing that.
Yeah, that was the big reveal there, which was an important part of his mythology we have to capture. But nothing. I mean, I think this, when you talk about kind of definitive runs or definitive things on characters, this one to me was it. This is Wolverine's definitive origin. I don't know that you need more than this, and I think they've proven you didn't.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think that's just please, if you've never read Weapon X from Barry Windsor Smith, please check it out. It's worth it.
Though I will say this, I do not recommend, if you could find the original issues, which good luck with that, but if you find the 72 through 84 of
get a great fiber story in there.
Get those. Or find the ones, find the collections where they haven't been recolored, where you see it says art. It's written and illustratedly. That's how it's written. Writer artist Barry Windsor Smith. You don't see. They might have cover colors, cover artists, stuff like that. Do not pick up anything that's been recolored, because you'll know if it looks all muddy and brown. The original coloring is kind of garish. It's like a lot of it's very flat blues and very flat purples. There isn't that much highlight stuff going on, but that's the point. And then when this modern recoloring, it's butchery, like what they did to, God help it, they redid to even though Walt Simonson signed off on it, his Thor run, the Thor collections, where they just butchered the coloring. It's like Walt's like, I'm okay. What are they going to do? It's like, Walt, we're going to do it one way or another. We're going to recolor it, even if you don't want us to. We got to give these colorists something to do.
It's just a shame. It is. So keep that in mind. Like we mentioned earlier, you got Barry Windsor Smith doing everything. This is probably, for the big two, one of the few cases where you have one person's vision across the board, from art, story, lettering to coloring, everything. If you do have the opportunity to view it originally, it is amazing. But it's just incredible. And I heard at one point Marvel was pondering putting this out in black and white on glossy paper without the coloring, and I think that would be pretty cool to see. I'd love to see what that looks like. But definitely, if you haven't read this has got to be something you pick up. Like some of these other stories, Craven's Last Hunt, we did City of Crime. These are amazing things, and you'll have a good time.
Essential Comics. These are like, what if you want to be reading American comics, what comics do you need to read? This has to be among them. This has to be in that pile of stuff. And it's like a lot of people say, "Oh, start with the first volume of this." Like, I'm gonna be a lot more picky when it comes to stuff like that, like City of Crime, Weapon X, Craven's Last Hunt. You got to get because if you start with like X-Men, X-Men from the '60s, that omnibus trade, you're probably going to be like, this is kind of boring. Warner Roth.
It's good stuff. Yes, the art is terribly dated. There's no phone booth there, but it feels like there has to be one. Plenty of captions, but you still you're in for a good time. Joe and Larry, thank you very much for going down nice memory lane here of a good comic. At least it didn't turn out like our other like our Grant Morrison.
Yes, no, this was great.
It holds up.
Yeah.
But thank you everybody for listening, and of course, go check this out,
please.